Hello and welcome to sunny Los Angeles. Today something a little bit different. I just published 2 articles in trackingangle.com all about the history of audiophile classical vinyl reissues, and this was prompted by the ongoing success of the Deutsche Grammophon original source series and thoughts on, okay, so where are we going to go from here? Are some of the other great classical labels going to get a hint and think about diving into their catalogs and reissuing all those amazing titles, AAA, done properly with good mastering engineers? Well, there's no sign of it yet, but we can all live in hope. So the article really went into all the issues around this and the bad ways in which labels have reissued their treasured catalogs in recent years, mainly from digital files, and making some suggestions about how they might do better. So I thought as an addendum to these articles, I would go into my collection and dig out some choice records, which I think would be tremendous as AAA, all analog vinyl reissues. Now, some of these records were actually originally recorded quadraphonic, just like the Deutsche Grammophon original source series. So there is some hope that these records could be remastered in exactly the same way, directly from the master tapes, which are 4 or 8 track, I think, in most cases. And we could get records very similar to the Deutsche Grammophon original source series. That's a speculation, that's a hope. But there are some records like that included in this survey. Now, I've gone through a lot of records. I went a little bit mad. I had a great time going through my collection. These are all records where I know that the original tapes must sound really, really good, because these pressings in the main sound very, very good. There are a couple of sections, some Sonys and RCAs, which do not sound so good, but we know from the reissues on CD and a couple of previous audiophile reissues and some reissues on Dutton Vocalion doing CD, SACD versions of these titles, some of the surround sound titles. We know that these master tapes actually sound really good indeed. So they are very good candidates for high quality AAA audiophile reissues. So without further ado, let's dive in to these titles. Enjoy. So let's begin with some vintage EMI, not recorded quadraphonic, but these are from analog's golden age and are definitely worthy of a AAA reissue. Now, this is not the record I'm focusing on, but this is the record that I'm sure you all know, the Elgar Cello Concerto with Jacqueline Dupre and the C pictures. And here is my early pressing. But the record I was going to recommend is probably lesser known. This is her doing the Haydn Cello Concerto and the Boccherini Cello Concerto. This is an absolutely glorious record. And again, here is my early pressing. I probably bought this in around 1969, 1970, when I was starting to play the cello. Now, I have quite a few of these early Columbias. They're very, very collectible. I got them many, many years ago before the prices went crazy. But my favorite violin records are the next 2. These are my favorite violin records in my entire collection. Nathan Milstein, and this is the Beethoven Violin Concerto. And here you see it's an original early pressing. And then the next record I have with him is this one, the Mozart Violin Concertos. This is, again, absolutely glorious, mid-hall sound. His violin playing is exquisite. And this is the second label, Magic Notes label, so called because of, as you can see, the magic notes. These are often worth collecting over the silver labels. They're much cheaper and they sound just as good, still tube mastered. And I have many Klemperer records, and there are many more I'd love to get. Here's a very special one. It's rarer. This is him conducting Kurt Weill music and also Johann Strauss and his own waltz. And again, this is an original label pressing. This sounds absolutely fantastic. It's very different. And look, here's the original in a sleeve. Isn't that fun with all the different artists? Terrific stuff. So moving on to the 1970s EMI releases, and many of these were recorded quadraphonic. Now, whether the master tapes are in such a condition that they could be remastered directly from the 4 and 8 track, like the Deutsche Grammophon original source. I don't know for sure, but imagine if they could be. That would be amazing. But even just as regular stereo reissues, these would be phenomenal. I'm going to start by focusing on one of my favorite recording artists and his records. I mean, you could really reissue all of these from the 70s on EMI, and that's Andre Previn with the London Symphony Orchestra. I've picked out a few choice titles. This is one of the very best. Midsummer Night's Dream. I actually prefer this recording to the one on Decca, the famous one by Marg. And this is simply glorious. The complete music, so you get the vocal music, the choral music, it's utterly enchanting. Here's one of my perennial demonstration quality records. It's absolutely outstanding. You've got the perfect perspective on the orchestra where you get all the detail, but also the large scale quality of the orchestra going at full blast, plus all the delicacy. This is beautiful, very accessible music, some of it taken from Britain's opera Peter Grimes, and then also the devastating Sinfonia de Requiem, which was written very peculiarly as a commission from the Japanese government just before the outbreak of World War II. It's a pacifist piece. It's an absolutely stunning recording, stunning performance. Here's one of the real audiophile spectaculars in the Previn catalogue, Messiaen's massive Turangalila Symphony, which includes a massive orchestra, solo piano, and the Onde Martino. And this is just a sensational recording. God, imagine this as a AAA reissue done with the full EBS expertise working on it. It would be incredible. Andre Previn was always superb in dance music, and I think that may go back to his early days working in Hollywood. I mean, he conducted the original soundtrack for My Fair Lady and composed music for films. He's just got a real feel for ballet, and he issued 3 very famous sets in the analogue era of ballet music, all the Tchaikovsky, the 3 ballets, and then he did this, Prokofiev's Romeo and Juliet, and then later in the digital era, he did Cinderella. This recording is up in competition against the famous Lorin Maazel recording with the Cleveland Orchestra on Decca, which many people tend to favor. It's a more in-your-face, I guess, exciting on the surface performance. But I like how Previn takes his time with this music, and this really delivers an emotional punch. I absolutely love this recording, beautifully recorded, perfectly judged. Oh, to have this in a new reissue, that would be amazing. Quick detour to another label. Previn recorded with RCA quite a bit before he came to EMI, and this is generally considered to be one of the great recordings of the 20th century. It's definitely the best recording of this phenomenal symphony, and to have this in a reissue would be sensational, because the vinyl on the couple of copies I've had is not the quietest. I have the English reissue from some years later. This is the original American, but to have this would be marvelous. And sticking with William Walton, Previn was always a great Walton conductor. His recording on EMI Belshazzar's Feast I could easily have included here. It's still my favorite version of this, and there have been many others. But here's a follow-up album he did to that first symphony of the Second Symphony, which is not so well known, but I think is an equally fine piece. Very different character, lighter character, but the pairings here are fascinating. Portsmouth Point and Scapino overtures, very popular, but in particular the Constant Lambert Rio Grande with a choir and solo piano, and it's really great. It's a wonderful piece. It deserves to be better known. This is a sensational recording, and look, that fantastic cover art. There are so many great recordings in the EMI catalogue by Sir Adrian Boult, obviously specializing in English music, but his recordings of other music are really great. He did a wonderful set of Wagner overtures and preludes. He did the Brahms symphonies. He's a great, great conductor. And he tends to work with the London Philharmonic Orchestra, which has a very rich, ripe sound. And it's my favorite of the London orchestras. Anyway, in the 1970s, he returned to Elgar's two great symphonies, which at the time was starting to find acceptance abroad, in particular in the German markets, as being serious symphonies worthy of the lineage of Brahms and Beethoven. And these are my two favorite recordings. I mean, he did earlier very fine recordings, in particular for Lyrita, but I love these recordings. And look at this beautiful artwork he uses. There's the first symphony, and there's the second symphony. Look at this fantastic artwork. Just love this stuff. These are wonderful records. Then here's a lesser known record that he did of the Vaughan Williams Fantasia on a Theme of Thomas Tallis, which is an exquisite piece. And then some rarer Vaughan Williams works. I really love these performances and this recording. It's not so well known. How great it would be to have this reissued AAA. And I will quickly mention here the obvious famous earlier recording of the Fantasia on a Theme of Thomas Tallis. This one from the 60s. I have several copies of this. This is my postage stamp. I have the alto reissue, which maybe sounds the best. And this is just a glorious record. It has been reissued, like I said. Interestingly here, the Fantasia on a Theme by Thomas Tallis was recorded in London's Temple Church at the suggestion of the film composer Bernard Herrmann, who knew the Barbarollis. He and his wife, they were friends with the Barbarollis, and he suggested recording it in the Temple Church, and that's why that recording of the Fantasia has this otherworldly, ethereal atmosphere. Another fantastic record of English string music, I love English string music, is this one on Decca, a phenomenal recording. Kenneth Wilkinson, Britten conducting the introduction at Allegro by Elgar, some of his own music, the Simple Symphony. It's a fantastic program. This was recorded in the Snape Maltings, and here you have some of the other pieces here. You want to try and lay hands on an original wideband Decca, and also the King Super Analog version is very good, but actually I prefer overall the original wideband Decca. I have both a wideband and a narrowband. This is a phenomenal record, well worth seeking out. Another conductor who made just one great record after another on EMI in the 70s is Paavo Berglund, and I've got a couple here. This one of the Nielsen Fifth Symphony, probably his most famous symphony, is just superb. It's one of the best recordings, and I think it is the best recording on vinyl. Another great record by him is of the Shostakovich piano concertos with Christina Ortiz. She became quite a star during this period and then somewhat faded from view, but she is a really phenomenal pianist, and I love this recording. Bournemouth Symphony Orchestra, regional orchestra, not considered in the top tier, but on these recordings they sound totally top tier. And investigate Berglund's catalogue, it's full of gems, fantastic. Another conductor who made a series of superb records, performance-wise, repertoire-wise, sound-wise for EMI in the 70s is Charles Groves, working with mainly the Royal Liverpool Philharmonic Orchestra. And this is one of his absolute best records. This is music by Frank Bridge, who was Benjamin Britten's teacher. So he's that generation earlier. And we're getting a sense of late romantic music, but also modernism creeping in. And this record covers the range of several years. And so you're hearing very different styles at work, starting with the C, more traditional, but then you get Enter Spring, which is a phenomenal tone poem. This is a demonstration record. Imagine this reissued. And now some records which are probably less familiar to you, but these all have spectacular sound. If you want to explore modern music, mid-20th century, a great place to begin is with the music of the Polish composer Penderecki. And he recorded a series of albums for EMI in the 70s, which are definitive. This one, the symphony, is really exciting The thing with Penderecki at this time, later in his career, he veered back towards tonality, but he really pioneered the whole idea of sort of note clusters and making strange sounds with the instruments, and all of that is on great display here. Another record of his from his period, which I love, is this one, The Song of Songs, and that takes up one side of a record, and it's a choral piece based on the famous ancient text. But what you've got on side 2 is you've got a whole series of really classic Penderecki pieces, including the Threnody to the Victims of Hiroshima, a piece written for strings, which is searing, absolutely extraordinary. And then The Dream of Jacob, which you probably know without realizing it, was used, this recording was used extensively by Stanley Kubrick in his film The Shining. This is another wonderful record. This is one of my favorite cello records. It was 2 pieces written specially for Rostropovich, the great Russian cellist, who I once served lunch to at the Opera Festival when I was working there as a student. He was quite the character. But anyway, 2 very contrasting cello concertos. The Dutilleux is modern, but it's in the tradition of Debussy, Ravel, impressionistic, lyrical, beautiful, even though modern in its use of tonality, very accessible, gorgeous piece. And then you flip the record over and you've got this incredible work by Lutoslawski, much more in your face, modern, starts off with these series of notes being just played on their own, the same note over and over again on the cello, and then the whole thing builds from there. I love this record, and the sound on this is sensational. This would be top of my list for a AAA reissue on vinyl. Next, a couple of records from one of my favorite pianists, Dmitry Alexeyev. I actually heard one of his first concerts in the West. This was while I was still at school, as I was a teenager, and my piano teacher took a group of his pupils to this funny little concert hall near our school in Slough, just outside of London. There's a famous line from John Betjeman, the poet laureate for many years, where he wrote this poem saying, "Come friendly bombs and fall on Slough." Slough really is a bit of a dump. Anyway, the concert was amazing, and I've been a fan of Alexeyev's ever since. He made a bunch of recordings for EMI in the late analog period and then moving into the digital period. But these are 2 of my favorites, collections of Brahms piano pieces, this one and this one. And these pieces are so exquisite. A couple of them are amongst my favorite piano pieces of all time, and I highly recommend these records, and to get these remastered would be just splendid. I just finished listening to the new original source version of the Pellini Preludes, and in some ways having the original source process applied to solo piano is almost the most revealing thing. You just hear the complexity of the instrument, the detail of the phrasing. There's something really exquisite about smaller scale music done AAA by first-class mastering engineers. Both these records should be on your list. Finally, one of EMI's favorite chamber music ensembles. I heard them live a few times growing up. This is one of their most accessible and exquisite records, because who doesn't love French chamber music? It's so lovely. And if you don't know the Ravel introduction and Allegro, you need to know it. It's absolutely glorious. I also have this great box set, which gathers a bunch of pieces featuring the great clarinetist Gervais de Peyer. These are wonderful records, and to have some of these, in particular that French chamber music album, Reissue AAA, would be splendid. And finally, here's a real sleeper. This has long been acknowledged as an audiophile classic, but it's not so well known, but it's absolutely splendid sounding. And this is great music of Rachmaninoff, Respighi orchestrations, and then Tchaikovsky rarer works. The New Philharmonia Orchestra playing its heart out for this conductor. And this is a splendid record. It's not a Melodia record, as many of the Russian works on EMI were originally recorded in Russia, and I have a huge collection of these. I love those Melodia records. I love the sound of Russian orchestras from the 60s and 70s. I mean, you have to hear Shostakovich done by these people, Tchaikovsky, Rachmaninoff. It's just a very different sound. Anyway, this would be a prime candidate for a AAA reissue. It would sound splendid.